Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, January 4th, 2023. The House of Representatives still has not elected a speaker, as the Republican leader Kevin McCarthy loses 3 more rounds of voting. It's now 6 ballots total in 2 days, and these last 3 today by a slightly wider margin than yesterday. 21 Republicans not voting for Kevin McCarthy. He could afford to lose only 4 and still win the speakership. Coming up, some of today's House floor action, and we'll talk about the battle for House Speaker with Washington Post chief correspondent Dan Balz. A bipartisan event in Kentucky, President Joe Biden joining Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell at a bridge that connects Covington, Kentucky to Cincinnati, Ohio, talking about the $1.2 trillion infrastructure law that many Senate Republicans voted for. And the bridge is one of the busiest freight routes in the country. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas interviewed today on the prospects of immigration reform now that the House of Representatives is controlled by Republicans. And the Secretary of State Antony Blinken presents the administration's strategy on global women's economic security. We start on the U.S. House floor, where representatives elect to the 118th Congress meeting for a second day to try to elect a House Speaker. And all 3 votes failing to do so today. No candidate getting a majority of those voting for candidates, which, if every one of the 434 current members voted, would be 218. Ahead of each vote, there were nominating speeches. This was before the first vote of the day, vote 4 overall. Republican Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin nominating Kevin McCarthy.
Nobody has done more to lay out a plan for how we restore the basic functioning of this institution than Kevin McCarthy. Nobody. Nobody has done that. Now, you may not have gotten everything you wanted. There are things I want that I know it's just not possible to get done in this Congress. But Mr. McCarthy has gone above and beyond in terms of listening to people with concerns and laying out a plan for how we restore the basic functioning of the House of Representatives. Furthermore, I believe no one has done more to bring us into the majority than Kevin McCarthy. Listen, I wish we had a bigger majority, right? I wish we could do everything over the next 2 years, but the American people gave us an opportunity. They gave us, Republicans, an opportunity to inject some basic common sense into the federal government, to pull the emergency brake on a lot of the crazy we've seen in the last few years. They're asking us to do a job, and nobody has laid out a plan, a proactive policy agenda for the direction we want to take this country in more detail than Kevin McCarthy. You all had an opportunity to provide input into that plan. And the irony of this current moment and this debate we're having is that on the big stuff we all agree, right? We want to secure the border. We don't want the executive branch to do everything through a pen and a phone. We want to work with our Democratic colleagues when it comes to standing up to our enemies abroad, right? There are basic things we know we need to do. It is time to get to work.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, Republican from Wisconsin, nominating the current Republican leader Kevin McCarthy of California for Speaker of the House, doing so on the House floor. Another nomination, this from Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas. He's nominating Byron Donalds, Republican from Florida.
Byron Donalds is a good man raised by a single mom who moved past adversity, became a Christian man at the age of 21, and has devoted his life to advancing the cause for his family and for this country. And he has done it admirably. But there's an important reason for nominating Byron, and that is this country needs a change. This country needs leadership that does not reflect this city, this town that is badly broken. The House of Representatives is the people's house. It represents the entirety of our country, and we each represent some 750,000 people. And we come here, and here we sit in a room filled with those representatives. And my friend, Mr. Gallagher, and he is my friend, and I agree with him on many things, and I agree with almost everything that you were talking about. But we should be in here having this kind of a conversation with this many people in the room about Ukraine. And we should debate the merits, and we should debate the ups and downs of being involved. We should debate the $45 billion. We should debate whether it should be more or less. We should debate whether it should be paid for. We should debate what the result we should demand. The only way you're going to get that is if you change the rules and have the leadership to advance the rules to make sure that we can do that. Now, we've had a conversation for 2 months to try to advance the ball, and we have had success in doing that. But we're not there. We're not at the place where we need to be to guarantee that we're going to be able to stand up in the face of the swamp that continues to step over the American people on a daily basis and spend money we don't have, and to continue to leave our borders open, and to continue to fund bureaucrats that are stepping over the freedoms of the American people. Byron will stand up and do that. Byron has a track record of doing that.
Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, nominating Congressman Byron Donalds, Republican from Florida, today on the House floor for Speaker of the House. There was a third nomination put in, as has been the case in all the ballots so far for Speaker. That's the nomination of Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, the House Democratic leader. And the result of this vote for Speaker, number 4 overall, Hakeem Jeffries getting the most, 212. Republican Kevin McCarthy getting 201. Republican Byron Donalds getting 20, and one member voting present. So again, nobody getting a majority, no speaker elected. On to vote number 5. The same 3 candidates were nominated. When Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, Republican from Colorado, nominated Byron Donalds, she mentioned that former President Donald Trump has been making some phone calls to try to influence this race.
We see him as someone who can communicate what we are all wanting to do in this House to Americans. And he represents so much more than just his district in Florida. Many millions of Americans all over this nation praise the work and the leadership of Byron Donalds. So let's work together. Let's stop with the campaign smears and tactics to get people to turn against us, even having my favorite president call us and tell us we need to knock this off. I think it actually needs to be reversed. The president needs to tell Kevin McCarthy that, sir, you do not have the votes, and it's time to withdraw. And with that, I yield. Thank you.
Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, Republican from Colorado, right before the 5th vote overall, the second for today for House Speaker, and the final tally for this vote, same as the other one today. Hakeem Jeffries, 212, Kevin McCarthy, 201, Byron Donalds, 20, and one member voting present, no speaker elected. And there was even a third vote today with the same 3 candidates nominated and the same vote total. Congressman Byron Donalds was interviewed today on Fox News about the Speaker's race and his being nominated for Speaker.
What are your intentions here? Because it seemed going into this that you might be willing to vote for Kevin McCarthy if you thought he was viable. Do you believe he is no longer viable?
I think the path is very difficult right now for Kevin. But look, at the end of the day, what I want to make sure is that we elect the Speaker of the House and we go on and accomplish the business that the American people sent us here to do. We know the issues. We have a porous border. We're massively in debt. Purchasing power for the American families has been crippled under this administration, and we want to fix all those problems. But one of the core issues we have is that Washington is broken. The House does not function. And so we want to see a process where power is actually devolved back to the members of Congress so that they can do the job on behalf of the people who sent them here, so we can actually start the process of fixing the issues that are ailing every American. Now, coming back to the speakership vote, my intentions is to make sure that we get a speaker elected and that we start this process. It may be me, it may not be me, but those are my intentions.
You voted for McCarthy the first time around, yourself
Right.
today. What has your conversation been with Kevin McCarthy?
We had a brief conversation this morning. I'm not going to share the details of that because, I actually believe in keeping those conversations private. But right now, there's a lot of members on the floor, and I'm quite sure all the cameras see it. You have members in active dialogue right now as we speak. Now, take a step back. The one thing that is necessary for this body to function is active dialogue amongst the members, and you're seeing that right now on the House floor. That will only yield the best results for the American people overall. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to have more meetings, more discussions, and figure out if there's a pathway for Kevin to become Speaker or anybody else to become Speaker. But that's the job that needs to be done. What we want to see is that leadership actually reflects where the American people are, and that leadership is something that is earned here in the nation's capital, not just given. And that's not an anti-Kevin statement. That is an indictment of the political process here in Washington, D.C.
Congressman Byron Donalds, Republican from Florida, today on Fox News as he was nominated today for Speaker, getting 20 votes in 3 separate ballots. One member today voted present 3 times for Speaker. Republican Victoria Spartz of Indiana. She told reporters it was to move the needle to get back to negotiations among the Republican factions to find some way to get a Speaker elected.
Move the needle, and moving the needle needs to come one other direction. So if that wasn't
Is there anything specific you want to deliberate on?
I want to deliberate, so we have a speaker because we have to get to work. If American people accept it, get to work, but we cannot just exhaust when we don't have that. So the only way for us to get the speaker to go back to the room, to the drawing board, and discuss how we can address concerns of 20 people.
Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, Republican from Indiana, speaking with reporters as she walked through the hallways of Congress. Throughout the votes for Speaker, 2 days now, 6 votes, all 212 Democratic members-elect of the House have supported the House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries for Speaker. At a news conference this morning, the House Democratic Caucus chair, Pete Aguilar of California, made clear that that's going to continue.
Democrats are unified. House Democrats are unified. You saw that yesterday. We're unified behind lowering costs, creating good-paying jobs, and building safer communities. The contrast between House Democrats on the chaos and confusion taking place on the other side of the aisle could not be more clear. For the first time in 100 years, there was not an agreement for Speaker of the House on the first ballot. Multiple ballots, and almost 24 hours later, there's still no clear sign of a Speaker. Let's hope that this isn't a rerun of 1855 and 56 when it took 133 ballots. What we saw was the true character of the modern-day Republican Party, obsessed with power and their own personal advancement at the expense of working families and the needs of everyday Americans. That makes it harder for us to find common ground, but that's what we seek to accomplish. We want to work with reasonable Republicans and continue our record of bipartisan legislative achievements in this Congress. But we need willing partners in order to do that work. And right now, those willing partners are in short supply.
Congressman Pete Aguilar of California, the House Democratic Caucus chair, at a news conference this morning. The White House said on Tuesday that President Joe Biden would not, in the Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre's words, insert himself into the election for House Speaker, citing his experience as a U.S. Senator with the congressional process. Today, President Biden saying it does not look good to other countries that the U.S. cannot reach a consensus.
Are you concerned about the implications of there not being a functioning House of Representatives at this point?
Well, obviously I am, in terms of, put my hat on here, for 2 reasons. One, it's embarrassing for the country. I mean, literally, I'm not making a part of this. The reality is that, to be able to have a Congress that can't function is just embarrassing. We're the greatest nation in the world. How can that be? And we've had a lot of trouble with, I'm sorry for the noise, a lot of trouble with the attacks on our institutions already. And that's what worries me more than anything else.
With more on the U.S. House's not yet electing a speaker, we're joined on the phone now by Dan Balz, Washington Post chief correspondent who covers national politics, the presidency, and Congress. Thank you so much for being with us. So, how long does this go on, and how does it end?
The two unanswerable questions of the hour. It seemingly could go on a long time. We've done it 6 votes over 2 days, and literally nothing has changed. There were 19 people against Kevin McCarthy in the Republican conference, and then there were 20, and since then there have been 20. Every Democrat is voting for Hakeem Jeffries, and there's not been a crack in that, and there won't be one. McCarthy has actually lost a bit of ground as somebody's voting present. So nothing has changed over 2 days and 6 votes, which suggests that nobody at this point knows how to unlock this or what the formula is. And so they have adjourned for at least a few hours to try to go back and talk and see whether there's any give. And we will see. But I think nobody really knows the answer to either of your questions.
Well, it is one of the possible solutions that's been floated is a consensus candidate, somebody who has not yet been nominated, somebody perhaps that could appeal to some Democrats as well as a group of Republicans. Is that a real possibility?
I think at this point that's still quite far-fetched. This is a hugely polarized country and a very, very polarized House of Representatives. And I think the Republicans are going to work as hard as they can to resolve this internally without turning to Democrats. The minute they turn to Democrats, there's going to be a lot of Republicans who are going to feel that that they've been betrayed. So there's been this rumor or that trial balloon over the last 12 or 16 hours. But I think at this point, it's still the Republicans' problem to solve.
What does the group of 20 or so Republicans who won't vote for Kevin McCarthy really want, and why are they saying Kevin McCarthy can't deliver?
Well, that too is a somewhat unanswerable question because McCarthy has made any number of concessions to this group, and the complaint among some of the McCarthy supporters and loyalists is that the rebels keep kind of moving the goalposts, and every time they get something, they want something more. It's also not clear how unified all 20 are about what they want. Certainly there are some who have views, but I think you put Chip Roy of Texas in a different place than Matt Gaetz of Florida. I mean, I think they're just different types of politicians. And I think Chip Roy has some, serious and substantive reforms that he wants to see, whereas Gaetz has never been a legislator. He's been more of a performative politician. So, again, though the 20 have held firm in their opposition to McCarthy, I don't know that they have a unified view of exactly what it would take to get them to support somebody presumably other than McCarthy.
We're talking with Dan Balz from the Washington Post. What role, if any, is Donald Trump playing in this?
Well, it's curious. McCarthy has done everything possible to woo the former president since attacking him over the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and then immediately going down to Mar-a-Lago to make nice. Donald Trump got involved again today by sending out a message that the party needs to get this resolved and that they ought to support McCarthy. It had absolutely no effect today. It did not change a single vote. So at this point, you would say that the former president is playing a very, very minimal role. But one of the things you hear today is that the longer this goes on, the more it could hurt Donald Trump, whether he's got any influence in it or not. It's just simply the idea that the Trump Republican Party is a dysfunctional party, and that, again, if he is not able to exercise his influence, it is a sign that his influence is decreasing within the party. And so I think that's kind of the conundrum for the former president at this point.
President Biden, when asked about this, said that it's an embarrassment that the United States has not chosen a speaker, that the world is looking at us and seeing it doesn't look good. And the House Republicans who are fighting this fight say it's just good, robust debate. But congressional historians said this has happened in the past multiple times, but not in the modern era. How should people look at what's happening? People who may not follow politics all that closely.
Well, I think a couple of things. One is, the last time it happened, there wasn't television. C-SPAN did not have cameras in the House of Representatives. There was not cable television following this hour by hour, minute by minute, vote by vote. And so whatever happened, a century ago had much less impact on the American people. And this is playing out in real time. I think Republicans who say this is just a sign of a robust democracy are saying that only to try to convince themselves that it is not further damaging the image of the Republican Party in the eyes of the American people. And I think that the longer this goes on, the more that is a threat. But I think the bigger concern is what this means for the next 2 years. You have now a Republican majority in the House that is very, very slender. And as we've seen in these votes, 5 people can deny the Republican majority the ability to operate as a majority. And if they can't even elect a speaker, what are they going to do when they come to the debt ceiling? What are they going to come to do when they come to, enacting appropriations bills or omnibus bills? What are they going to do when they come to try to put together an immigration package, for example? The Republicans have struggled whenever they've had the majority to do anything on immigration. And so the serious business of governing is what comes after organizing the House of Representatives. And they're failing the first test of that at this point. And it does not bode well for what the next 2 years are going to bring.
Dan Balz is a Washington Post chief correspondent covering politics, presidency, and the Congress. You can find his stories at WashingtonPost.com, and on Twitter it's at Dan Balz. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Washington Today continues in a moment.
Pre-order your copy of the Congressional Directory for the 118th Congress. It's your access to the federal government, with bio and contact information for every House and Senate member, important information on congressional committees, the President's Cabinet, federal agencies, and state governors. Pre-order your copy today for delivery in March. It's $29.95 plus shipping and handling, and every purchase helps support our nonprofit operations at cspanshop.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. A story at thehill.com, President Biden on Wednesday made an appeal to the value of bipartisanship during a trip to Kentucky, providing a stark split-screen moment with the chaos unfolding in the House back in Washington, D.C. President delivered remarks in the shadow of the Brent Spence Bridge, which connects Kentucky and Ohio over the Ohio River, to tout investments from the bipartisan infrastructure law he signed in late 2021 that would improve local traffic and commerce. But the speech was more broadly a nod to the president's belief in collaboration and reaching across the aisle at a time when Republicans have been unable to muster the votes with their new majority to elect a speaker in the House. That from the Hill. President, in his remarks, praising the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, who was there and among the 18 Senate Republicans who had voted for that infrastructure bill.
I'm especially happy to be here with my friend and colleague in many years, and I might add, longest-serving leader in the United States Senate, Senator Mitch McConnell. Mitch, it's great to be with you. I asked permission if I could say something nice about him. I didn't want to. I said I campaigned for him or against him, whichever helped him most. But Mitch, it wasn't easy, and to get this done, and it wouldn't have gotten done no matter all the work so many others have done, and by writing the legislation and dropping it in, it wouldn't have happened without your hand. It just wouldn't have gotten done, and I want to thank you for that. And we have to find common ground to get major legislation done in any circumstance ever, but particularly the circumstances we've been in the last 4 or 5 years have been less than cooperative. And Leader McConnell and I don't agree on everything. In fact, we disagree on a lot of things, but here's what matters. He's a man of his word. When he gives you his word, you can take it to the bank, you can count on it, and he's willing to find common ground to get things done for the country. So thank you, Mitch. Thank you. And that's exactly what we did in the bipartisan infrastructure law, which got done in no small part because of Mitch's leadership.
President Biden in Covington, Kentucky, standing next to that bridge. Senator Mitch McConnell also making some remarks, talking about the importance of working with the Democrats where possible, and saying that $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill was one that was possible.
This is a day I think many people in northern Kentucky thought might never happen. For those of us who've run for public office in Kentucky over the years, every time you came to northern Kentucky, the issue was how we're going to get the bridge built. And as all the Kentucky politicians can tell you, the issue of possibly tolling the bridges was very, very toxic. And so today we sit in this wonderful clear day with sun shining down on literally a legislative miracle. How did it come together? Well, Senator Portman, from whom you had a chance to hear, was the active person on our side. Several Democratic senators on the other side came together and began to talk about how we might be able to work together to get an outcome. We all know these are really partisan times, but I always feel no matter who gets elected, once it's all over, we ought to look for things we can agree on and try to do those, even while we have big differences on other things. And this bridge, I think, symbolizes the coming together of both sides on something that both sides thought was important to try to get an outcome. You have a Democratic governor here, Governor Beshear, a Republican legislature led by Senate President Stivers, Kentucky House led by Speaker David Osborne, Chris McDaniel from Northern Kentucky, who took the lead on it down in Frankfort to provide the matching funds that we needed to make this project go forward. So it's not just this project, but the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that the president signed, provides dramatic additional assistance. Just looking at the Kentucky side of the river, this project plus other projects, over $8 billion over the next 5 years. This is really quite significant. And as we know, even though it benefits us in Ohio and Kentucky, nationally, this was one of the big projects in the entire country to deal with the crumbling infrastructure that we've all been talking about for years. And so we finally stepped up together and addressed it.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, today in Kentucky, joined by President Biden and Republican and Democratic elected leaders, governors, and U.S. senators from Kentucky and neighboring Ohio at the Brent Spence Bridge over the Ohio River. Wall Street today, the Dow up 133, NASDAQ up 71, S&P up 28. An article from Reuters, U.S. President Joe Biden on Tuesday renominated a number of stalled picks for a slate of federal posts, including nominees to head the Internal Revenue Service, Federal Aviation Administration, Ambassador to India, and Federal Communications Commission. The White House said the selections did not get approved by the U.S. Senate, which was split 50-50 between Republicans and Democrats, with Vice President Kamala Harris breaking ties. The new Senate convened on Tuesday. That from Reuters. And, of course, that new Senate is now 51-49 in favor of the Democratic caucus. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre asked by reporters today about the renominations.
You talked a little bit about renominations yesterday. The Senate sent about 175 folks back. You guys have outlined plans for at least 110 of them to be renominated. But my question is, will everybody that you had nominated in the last Congress be renominated?
We seek the swift confirmation of many critical, crucial, high qualified nominees to serve across the administration, and we'll be renominating a number of officials in the coming weeks. I don't have a specific number to share with you at this time, but clearly, as you saw, we did a good portion yesterday, as you just laid out, and we'll have more to share in a couple of weeks. I just don't have. I know you want a specific number. I know you're asking for all. I just don't have much.
Number than the question of if everybody's going to be renominated and it's just a timing issue, or if you're kind of hiding the ball on folks that you're no longer interested in nominating.
I wouldn't say hiding the ball. We're just going through our process. You know how the process works, right? At the end of each Congress, you have to, or at the beginning of every new Congress, you have to do the renominations, and just we're working through that process. And look, the folks that you saw us renominate yesterday were folks who are critical to our public safety, critical to our national security, and incredibly important to the American for the American people. So that's how we went forward on those few. We will definitely have more to share in the next couple of weeks.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with reporters on Air Force One as they flew with President Biden from Washington, D.C. to Kentucky today. One of the nominations that was resubmitted is former Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti to be U.S. Ambassador to India. He was approved by the Foreign Relations Committee in the previous Congress unanimously, but never got a full Senate vote. Associated Press reporting that he's faced accusations of turning a blind eye to misconduct by a top aide in his mayor's office. But Eric Garcetti has repeatedly denied being aware of any inappropriate behavior. President Biden telling reporters today he intends to visit the southern border next week as he attends the North American Leaders Summit in Mexico City. This would be his first trip to the U.S.-Mexico border since he took office as president, and it comes as the Supreme Court has ordered the Title 42 border policy that allows migrants to be turned away due to COVID-19 public health concerns to stay in place, and the High Court scheduling oral arguments in that case next month. Today, the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas interviewed about immigration and border issues by Washington Post reporter Nick Miroff.
Nick, I'm an undying optimist. On his very first day in office, President Biden sent to the Hill, to Congress, a comprehensive package that would have meant so much to our ability to really manage the situation at the border, to really bring a broken immigration system that hasn't been reformed for decades, to really bring it into the present day, not just from a point of view of enforcement, but also realizing the opportunities that immigration brings to our country. The labor need in this country is so great. We have 10 million job openings in the United States. I was reading about what Canada is doing to address 1 million open jobs. They're bringing in about 1.3 million migrants to fill that labor need that cannot be met within their own borders. President Biden sent forward a comprehensive package on day one. It has not occurred yet. We haven't realized the reform that everyone understands is so desperately needed. I'm an undying optimist, and we're going to stay true to the fight to pass reform that our country needs and from which our country will prosper.
The Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, in a Washington Post virtual interview today, asked about the prospects for immigration reform now that the U.S. House of Representatives is in Republican control. CBS News reporting the Biden administration on Tuesday proposed increasing application fees for employment-based visas and other immigration programs, in part to fund the adjudication of soaring numbers of asylum claims along the U.S.-Mexico border. The proposed rule would also keep application fees for U.S. citizenship and humanitarian immigration benefits such as asylum close to or at current levels, as well as codify and expand fee waivers for low-income immigrants and other populations, such as military veterans and victims of human trafficking and other serious crimes. The Biden administration today putting forth a strategy on global women's economic security. They say it's aimed at increasing women's participation in the workforce across the world. Secretary of State Antony Blinken attending the unveiling at the State Department today in Washington, saying the strategy comes after a dozen U.S. government departments and agencies consulted with over 200 civil society groups and stakeholders from more than 30 countries.
The strategy that we're putting forward has at its heart a simple vision: creating a world in which all women and girls, everywhere, can contribute to and benefit from economic growth and global prosperity. That's a world in which we will all be better off. Closing the gender gap in the workforce by 2025, as you've heard, would add up to $28 trillion to the global economy, especially at a time when we are working to recover from COVID, deal with the impact of climate, address the many conflicts that are also holding back the global economy. That contribution is more vital than ever. The strategy focuses on breaking down some of the barriers that stand in the way of women to full economic participation. Jen and Kat alluded to some of them: discriminatory policies that perpetuate unequal pay or limit access to credit that women entrepreneurs and innovators need to start and grow businesses, laws that ban women from energy, manufacturing, and other industries in certain countries, attitudes and practices that drive women out of education and out of the labor market. The strategy that we put in place is focused on supporting women and girls in all of their diversity, including the women who most often face the greatest and highest barriers, such as those from marginalized backgrounds, from religious minorities, those with disabilities, LGBTQI+ persons, and we're committed to standing up for women wherever their rights are threatened, including in Afghanistan, as unfortunately we continue to see deepen and get worse.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the State Department today on the first ever U.S. strategy on global women's economic security. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word to get the top stories in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.